Have you noticed something unusual happening across the Sahel in recent weeks? Within a remarkably short period of time, senior officials and high-level delegations from Benin, Mauritania, and Côte d'Ivoire have all sought closer contact with the Alliance of Sahel States, known as AES. For many observers, this sudden wave of diplomatic outreach has raised an important question. Why now? What makes these developments even more intriguing is that these countries were not always aligned with the political direction taken by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger during the early stages of their transitions. Yet today, messages of cooperation, dialogue, and renewed engagement seem to be coming from several directions at once. Does this signal a genuine desire for regional reconciliation, or could it represent a strategic adjustment after previous methods of pressure failed to produce the expected results? While no one can claim to know every discussion taking place behind closed doors, one thing is certain. The diplomatic landscape around AES is changing. To understand what may be happening, we first need to examine a larger reality. The AES that many critics once predicted would struggle to survive is no longer viewed in the same way. Over the past few years, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have strengthened cooperation in security, political coordination, and regional planning. Instead of disappearing from the regional scene, the alliance has become one of the most closely watched developments in West Africa. And if you care about the future of the Sahel and the rise of a more self-reliant Africa, be sure to subscribe to the channel because the story we are about to explore may reveal much more than a series of diplomatic visits. The recent diplomatic activity surrounding the Alliance of Sahel States has not gone unnoticed. One event involved the new leadership of Benin seeking greater engagement with AES members. Discussions reportedly included the possibility of reopening important border connections and restoring stronger economic exchanges. Such proposals naturally attract attention because regional trade remains vital for both neighboring countries and local populations that depend on cross-border commerce. Another development came from Mauritania. Senior officials emphasized cooperation on security matters, regional stability, and coordination against common threats. Given the security challenges that continue to affect parts of the Sahel, such discussions can be viewed as practical and necessary. However, many citizens are still asking why these initiatives appear to be arriving almost simultaneously. Then there is Côte d'Ivoire. Statements supporting closer communication and cooperation with AES have added another layer to the conversation. For many observers, the question is not whether dialogue should exist. Most people recognize that neighboring states must communicate. The real question is why several governments that once appeared distant from the political direction of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are now expressing interest in renewed engagement. Supporters of AES often point to this timing as significant. They argue that if these countries are reaching out today, it may be because the alliance has demonstrated greater resilience than many expected. Critics once predicted isolation, economic collapse, or political fragmentation. Yet AES continues to function, coordinate policies, and maintain its presence on the regional stage. Of course, timing alone does not prove any hidden agenda. International relations are often shaped by changing realities. Governments adjust policies when circumstances evolve. Nevertheless, the simultaneous appearance of diplomatic initiatives from multiple directions has created a sense of curiosity across the Sahel, encouraging many people to look beyond individual visits and consider the broader regional picture. As people search for answers, another important question emerges. Why has AES become so difficult to ignore? The answer begins with geography, resources, and influence. The Sahel occupies a strategic position connecting several regions of Africa. Trade routes, Migration flows, security concerns, and economic interests often intersect across this vast area. What happens in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger rarely stays within their borders. The effects are felt across neighboring states as well. Beyond geography, the region possesses significant natural resources. Gold, uranium, and other valuable minerals have long attracted international attention. For decades, control over these resources has been closely linked to discussions about sovereignty, development, and foreign influence. As AES leaders increasingly emphasize national control over strategic assets, regional governments are paying close attention to the consequences. At the same time, AES has evolved into something larger than a security partnership. It is increasingly viewed as a political project with its own identity and vision, whether one agrees with every decision made by its leaders or not. The alliance has become a factor that regional governments must consider when planning their own strategies. This reality helps explain why diplomatic language may be changing. Governments generally prefer engagement with actors that possess influence, legitimacy among their populations, or strategic importance. The stronger AES appears, the greater the incentive for neighboring countries to maintain communication. For ordinary citizens across the Sahel, this creates an interesting dilemma. On one hand, renewed dialogue can reduce tensions and create opportunities for trade and cooperation. On the other hand, many people remain cautious because they remember previous disagreements and conflicting political positions. That is why the debate continues. Are these diplomatic initiatives signs of a new chapter in regional relations, or are they simply acknowledgments that AES has become a reality that can no longer be ignored? The growing attention directed toward AES cannot be separated from the image of one particular leader, Ibrahim Traore. Whether admired or criticized, he has become one of the most recognizable political figures in contemporary Africa. His influence now extends far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso. For many supporters, Traore represents a generation of African leaders determined to place sovereignty at the center of national decision-making. His speeches frequently emphasize self-reliance, control over national resources, and the right of African nations to choose their own partnerships without external pressure. These themes resonate strongly with many citizens across the continent, particularly among younger Africans seeking new models of leadership. As a result, developments involving Burkina Faso often attract attention far beyond what would normally be expected for a country of its size. Discussions about AES are increasingly linked to broader conversations about African independence, economic control, and regional cooperation. In that sense, the alliance is no longer viewed solely as a security arrangement. It is also seen by many as a symbol of political transformation. This helps explain why every diplomatic approach toward AES is closely scrutinized. When foreign officials visit Burkina Faso or seek closer engagement with the alliance, many observers ask whether they are simply engaging with a regional organization or responding to a growing political movement that has captured public attention across Africa. At the same time, it is important to recognize that influence brings responsibility. The more visible a leader becomes, the more carefully every decision is examined. Supporters expect consistency. Critics search for weaknesses. Partners evaluate opportunities. Rivals monitor developments. For this reason, recent diplomatic outreach toward AES is being interpreted through multiple lenses. Some see opportunities for constructive cooperation. Others see attempts to shape the future direction of the alliance. What is undeniable is that the rise of Ibrahim Traore has changed the way many people interpret political events throughout the Sahel. The growing influence of Ibrahim Traore also explains why discussions about AES often extend beyond immediate security concerns. Across many parts of Africa, debates surrounding the alliance have become connected to larger questions about sovereignty, development, and the future direction of the continent. Supporters frequently argue that one of the most important lessons from African history is that nations must remain vigilant when navigating international relationships. They point out that diplomacy can bring investment, trade, and stability. But it can also create new forms of dependence if leaders fail to protect national interests. From this perspective, caution is not a sign of hostility. It is a sign of political maturity. At the same time, it would be inaccurate to assume that every diplomatic initiative is driven by hidden motives. Countries often change policies because realities change. Economic interests evolve. Security concerns shift. Regional priorities adapt to new circumstances. This is a normal feature of international relations. That is why many observers believe the most important question is not whether AES should engage with neighboring countries. The more important question is how that engagement should occur. Can cooperation be expanded while maintaining strategic independence? Can new partnerships be developed without compromising core principles? These are the issues that will shape the next chapter of the alliance. For Ibrahim Traore and other AES leaders, the challenge is significant. They must balance openness with caution, opportunity with vigilance, and diplomacy with sovereignty. The choices made today could influence the political landscape of the Sahel for many years to come. As a result, the recent visits from Benin, Mauritania, and Côte d'Ivoire are being watched carefully by citizens throughout the region. Many people are less interested in official statements and more interested in the long-term consequences that may emerge from these renewed relationships. History offers an important lesson for every nation that seeks to protect its sovereignty. The greatest challenges do not always arrive through open confrontation. Sometimes they emerge through complex negotiations, economic incentives, political influence, or shifting regional dynamics. This is why many citizens across the Sahel believe that vigilance remains essential, regardless of who is extending a hand of friendship. However, vigilance should never be confused with isolation. No country can prosper by standing completely alone. Trade, diplomacy, security cooperation, and regional partnerships are all necessary components of long-term stability. The challenge is finding the right balance between engagement and independence. In the case of AES, several possible scenarios could explain the recent diplomatic activity. One possibility is that neighboring countries genuinely want to reduce tensions and improve cooperation after years of disagreement. Another possibility is that changing economic realities are encouraging governments to rebuild relationships that have become strategically important. A third possibility is that AES has gained enough regional influence that other states now view engagement as a practical necessity. There is also a perspective shared by some observers who believe that diplomacy can sometimes serve as a tool for influence. While there is no clear evidence proving such intentions in the current situation, this possibility explains why many citizens continue to ask questions and examine developments carefully. Ultimately, the most effective strategy for AES may not be to reject diplomatic outreach or to embrace it unconditionally. Instead, success may depend on maintaining clear principles, protecting national interests, and ensuring that every partnership delivers tangible benefits to the people. The future of the Sahel will likely be shaped not only by military strength or political speeches, but also by the wisdom with which leaders manage opportunities, risks, and relationships in an increasingly complex regional environment. As we examine all these developments together, one conclusion becomes clear. The question is not simply whether Benin, Mauritania, and Côte d'Ivoire are reaching out to AES. The deeper question is why these diplomatic initiatives are emerging at this particular moment in history. Perhaps the answer lies in the growing importance of the Alliance of Sahel States itself. What was once viewed by some observers as a temporary political arrangement has evolved into a regional actor that commands attention, whether through security cooperation, political coordination, or discussions about economic sovereignty. AES has established a presence that neighboring countries can no longer ignore. At the same time, caution remains a valuable principle. There is currently no evidence proving that every diplomatic approach conceals a negative agenda. Responsible analysis requires distinguishing facts from speculation. Yet, history also teaches that nations must remain alert whenever major strategic interests are involved. Cooperation and vigilance are not opposites. In many cases, they must exist side by side. This is where the broader vision of a Pan-African future becomes relevant. Across Burkina Faso and beyond, many citizens believe that the next chapter of Africa should be written by Africans themselves. Ideas associated with Pan-Africanism continue to inspire discussions about sovereignty, dignity, and self-determination. Leaders such as Captain Ibrahim Traore and other figures within AES have become symbols of that debate. Whether one agrees with every policy or not, the challenge ahead will be determining how AES engages with new opportunities while preserving its core principles. The future of the African Union, the aspirations of an Africa new generation, and the hopes of millions who support greater sovereignty may all be influenced by decisions made in the coming years. One thing is certain: the story is far from over. Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso, and the broader Pan-African movement will remain at the center of conversations shaping the future of the Sahel. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe to the channel, share this video, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. For years, ECOWAS spoke to Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger with the language of pressure. Borders were closed. Financial sanctions were imposed. Military intervention was openly discussed after the 2023 crisis in Niger. At one point, many people across West Africa believed the region was heading toward a dangerous confrontation between Africans themselves. But today, something has changed. The same ECOWAS that once threatened isolation is now sending mediators directly to Ouagadougou. The visit of veteran diplomat Lansana Kouyaté to meet Captain Ibrahim Traore was not just another diplomatic meeting. It was a powerful signal that the balance of power in West Africa is changing faster than many expected. Because the Alliance of Sahel States, known as AES, did not collapse under pressure. Instead, it survived. It organized. And now, it is forcing the region to adapt to a new reality. Many people in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are watching this moment carefully. They remember the sanctions. They remember the threats. They remember when ECOWAS treated their governments as a problem to be controlled rather than nations demanding sovereignty and respect. That memory has not disappeared. So while the new calls for cooperation are welcomed, they are also met with caution across the Sahel. And perhaps the biggest question now is this: did ECOWAS truly change its position voluntarily? Or did AES become too strong to ignore? Today, we will explore how Ibrahim Traore and the Alliance of Sahel States transformed the political future of West Africa, and why many Africans now believe a completely new chapter is beginning for the continent. If you believe Africa deserves partnerships built on dignity instead of pressure, make sure to subscribe and join us for more stories shaping the future of the continent. The anger across the Sahel did not appear overnight. When ECOWAS imposed sanctions on Niger after the 2023 military takeover, many ordinary citizens in Burkina Faso and Mali saw something deeply troubling. Instead of focusing on the growing terrorist violence that had devastated villages for years, regional leaders appeared more willing to punish fellow African nations economically and politically. Borders were closed, financial systems were restricted, trade routes were disrupted, and for millions of families already struggling with insecurity and poverty, daily life became even harder. Food prices increased in some areas, transportation became more complicated, small traders suffered losses. Many citizens felt they were paying the price for political decisions made far above them. But perhaps the moment that shocked the region most was the open discussion of possible military intervention in Niger. For many people across the Sahel, the idea of Africans going to war against other Africans, while terrorist groups continued expanding across the region, felt unacceptable. That was the moment when public opinion began shifting dramatically. In Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, demonstrations erupted in support of regional sovereignty. Protesters carried AES flags. Some openly accused ECOWAS of serving foreign interests rather than defending African unity. The political consequences were enormous. Instead of weakening Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the pressure pushed them closer together. Citizens who once viewed the three military governments separately now started seeing them as part of a shared struggle for independence and dignity. This is why many people in the Sahel remain cautious today. They welcome dialogue. They support peace. But they have not forgotten the years of pressure, threats, and isolation. And that memory continues to shape how many Africans now view both ECOWAS and the future of regional cooperation in West Africa. What began as a security alliance between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger is now becoming something much larger. When the Alliance of Sahel States was first announced, many international observers dismissed it as temporary. Critics believed the pressure of sanctions, economic weakness, and diplomatic isolation would eventually break the partnership apart. But that prediction failed. Instead of collapsing, AES slowly transformed itself into a new political and geopolitical force inside West Africa. The three countries strengthened military cooperation. They signed mutual defense agreements. Leaders repeatedly declared that any attack against one member would be treated as an attack against all. That message changed the political atmosphere of the region. For the first time in many years, Sahel nations were openly attempting to build a regional security structure without depending entirely on Western military direction. But AES also expanded beyond military cooperation. The alliance began discussing economic coordination, regional mobility, and independent diplomatic strategies. The introduction of AES passports became one of the clearest symbols that this project was no longer temporary. It was becoming institutional. At the center of this transformation was one powerful idea: sovereignty. Across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the word became more than political language. It became an emotional rallying cry for millions of people who believed their nations had spent too long under external pressure and influence. Young Africans especially connected with this message. On social media, at universities, and during public demonstrations, many began describing AES as the beginning of an Africa that speaks with its own voice, rather than repeating the priorities of foreign powers. And slowly, even ECOWAS had to confront a difficult reality. AES was not disappearing. It was growing stronger politically, emotionally, and symbolically across the Sahel. That realization may explain why the conversation in West Africa is no longer about whether AES will survive, but about how the rest of the region must now adapt to its existence. Among all the leaders who emerged during the Sahel crisis, one figure now stands at the center of the region's political transformation: Captain Ibrahim Traore. For supporters across Africa, he represents something larger than Burkina Faso itself. He is seen as the symbol of a generation that no longer wants African nations to live under permanent political economic, or military dependence. That is why his influence now extends far beyond Ouagadougou. In many African countries, young people share his speeches online alongside historical figures like Thomas Sankara. They admire his direct language about sovereignty, self-reliance, and African dignity. Unlike many traditional politicians, Traore presents himself as a leader willing to openly challenge both international pressure and old political structures inside Africa. This image has given Burkina Faso an entirely new role inside the Sahel. Years ago, major regional political decisions often revolved around capitals more closely aligned with Western influence. But today, Ouagadougou is increasingly viewed as one of the new political centers of West Africa. And ECOWAS understands this reality. The visit of Lansana Conté to Burkina Faso was not accidental. It reflected the growing recognition that meaningful dialogue with AES cannot happen without speaking directly to Ibrahim Traore and the leadership circle surrounding him. But Traore's popularity also comes from a deeper emotional message. He repeatedly argues that Africa must control its own security, resources, and future. For many citizens frustrated by years of violence and poverty, this message feels honest and powerful. Still, the situation remains complicated. Burkina Faso continues to face security challenges. Economic difficulties remain serious. International pressure has not disappeared. Yet, despite those obstacles, Ibrahim Traore has already changed the political conversation across the Sahel. The debate is no longer simply about military governments. It is now about whether Africa can truly build a future based on sovereignty, regional solidarity, and independence from external domination. At first glance, the visit of veteran diplomat Lansana Conté to Ouagadougou looked like a simple diplomatic mission. But in reality, it carried a much deeper political meaning. For years, ECOWAS approached Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger through sanctions, suspension measures, and political pressure. Dialogue often appeared secondary to confrontation. Yet now, the organization is openly calling for cooperation with the very alliance it once tried to isolate. That shift is impossible to ignore. Lansana Conté was carefully chosen for this mission. As a former executive secretary of ECOWAS, he understands the region's political tensions better than most diplomats. More importantly, he is viewed as someone capable of speaking with both sides without immediately escalating hostility. His words after meeting Ibrahim Traore were especially revealing. He emphasized that geography connects ECOWAS and AES. He spoke about the importance of populations continuing to move freely across borders. He insisted that cooperation between the two blocs remained necessary despite past tensions. These statements sounded diplomatic on the surface, but underneath them was a clear message. ECOWAS now recognizes that isolating AES is no longer realistic. The Alliance of Sahel States has survived pressure, built regional solidarity, and gained growing support among many citizens across the Sahel. The organization that was once treated as temporary is now being approached as a permanent political reality. Still, trust remains fragile. Many people in Burkina Faso and Niger continue to question whether ECOWAS truly respects the sovereignty of AES members or is simply adjusting to changing circumstances. That is why this moment feels so important. It is not just a meeting between diplomats. It is a test of whether West Africa can build a new relationship based on mutual respect instead of political pressure and fear. As AES continues gaining influence across West Africa, reactions from Western governments and international organizations have become increasingly critical. Many foreign analysts describe the alliance as a dangerous political shift. Some warn that military governments in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger could weaken democratic institutions. Others express concern about growing cooperation between the Sahel states and Russia. Western media often presents AES as a sign of instability and regional fragmentation. But inside the Sahel, many citizens see the situation very differently. For years, terrorist violence spread across villages and border regions. Despite the presence of international military operations, thousands of families were displaced. Entire communities lived in fear. Yet many people felt the old system failed to deliver real security or economic progress. This is why supporters of AES ask a difficult question. If the previous model was truly successful, why did insecurity continue expanding for so many years? That question has become central to the political debate across the region. Many Africans also accuse foreign powers of applying double standards. They argue that international pressure often arrives quickly after political coups, but far less urgency is shown toward poverty, resource exploitation, or the suffering caused by long-term instability. At the same time, AES leaders continue promoting a message about sovereignty over natural resources and independent partnerships. Their argument is simple. African nations should have the right to choose their allies and control their own political future without external coercion. Still, reality remains complicated. Security threats continue across the Sahel. Economic challenges remain severe, and international isolation carries real risks for development and investment. But regardless of political opinion, one fact is becoming increasingly difficult to deny. AES has already forced Africa and the wider world to reopen the debate about sovereignty, democracy, and who truly shapes the future of the continent. The political landscape of West Africa is changing before the eyes of the world. Not long ago, many believed AES would collapse under sanctions, pressure, and diplomatic isolation. But today, even ECOWAS is being forced to recognize a new reality. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are no longer acting like temporary partners reacting to crisis. They are attempting to build a completely different vision for the future of the Sahel. At the center of that transformation stands Captain Ibrahim Traore. For supporters across the continent, Ibrahim Traore represents more than a military leader. He symbolizes an Africa that wants to stand with dignity, protect its sovereignty, and make decisions without fear of outside pressure. That message has deeply resonated with many people who believe the continent must finally control its own future. Still, the road ahead will not be easy. Burkina Faso and its allies continue facing terrorism, economic hardship, and intense international scrutiny. Cooperation between ECOWAS and AES may improve, but trust will take time to rebuild after years of confrontation. Yet despite all these challenges, one thing has become impossible to ignore. A new political generation is rising across Africa. The debate is no longer only about governments or alliances, it is about identity, sovereignty, and the future direction of the continent itself. Whether one supports AES or not, the movement has already changed the conversation inside the African Union and across the Pan-African world. From Burkina Faso to the wider Africa New Movement, the message is growing louder. Pan-Africanism cannot survive through pressure and division. It can only survive through mutual respect between African nations. And that may become the lasting political legacy of Captain Ibrahim Traore and this historic moment in West Africa. If you want to continue following the future of Pan-African politics and the transformation of Africa, subscribe now and stay with us for the next story. May 24th, 2026, the inauguration ceremony of Benin's new president was supposed to be routine. Another political transition, another speech, another carefully staged diplomatic event in West Africa. Then the master of ceremonies began reading the names of foreign delegations. Niger's prime minister, Mali's foreign minister, Burkina Faso's foreign minister, and suddenly the atmosphere changed. The crowd erupted. Not polite applause, not diplomatic courtesy. Real emotion. Loud cheers rolling across the ceremony grounds in Cotonou like people had been waiting years for this exact moment. Think about how shocking that really is. These were representatives of the AES Alliance. Governments that had spent years in open confrontation with ECOWAS, governments that Benin itself had once helped isolate. Governments many Western analysts described as dangerous military regimes threatening regional stability. Yet here they were, not only attending the inauguration, but being welcomed by the people. So what just happened in Benin? Why did one of ECOWAS's closest coastal allies suddenly open the door to AES? And why are so many people across West Africa beginning to see Ibrahim Traore and the AES leadership as symbols of something much bigger than politics? Because this story is not really about one ceremony. It is about a massive shift happening across West Africa right now. A shift involving sovereignty, security, economics, Pan-African identity, and the collapse of old political assumptions that controlled the region for decades. And Benin may have just become the first country brave enough to publicly acknowledge that the old system is no longer working. If you enjoy deep strategic analysis about Africa's future, subscribe to the channel now because this story is much bigger than most people realize. To understand why this moment shocked ECOWAS, you need to go back to the crisis that reshaped West Africa in 2023. That was the year Niger's military removed President Mohamed Bazoum from power. ECOWAS reacted immediately. Sanctions, border closures, threats of military intervention. The regional bloc wanted to send a message that military takeovers would not be tolerated. But something unexpected happened. Mali and Burkina Faso did not isolate Niger. They stood beside it. Both countries had already experienced their own military transitions, and instead of backing ECOWAS pressure, they moved closer together. By January 2025, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger officially formed the Alliance of Sahel States, known as AES. For ECOWAS, this was a nightmare scenario. And for Benin, it created a direct crisis. At the time, Benin strongly supported the ECOWAS position. Under President Patrice Talon, relations with Niger became extremely hostile. Border tensions increased. Trade routes froze. Diplomacy collapsed. IES supporters across the region began describing Benin as a Western-aligned pressure point against the Sahel governments. But while politicians argued, reality became harder to ignore. Benin shares borders with both Niger and Burkina Faso. As regional cooperation collapsed, insecurity started spreading southward. Armed extremist groups slowly moved closer to Benin's northern provinces. At the same time, economic pressure was building. Truck traffic declined. Regional trade slowed. Border communities suffered. And suddenly, Benin found itself trapped in a dangerous position. Politically tied to ECOWAS, economically dependent on its northern neighbors, and increasingly vulnerable to a regional security crisis that no country could solve alone. That was the reality waiting for Ramon Wagdani when he entered the presidential race. And unlike many politicians, he looked at the situation without ideology. He looked at it as a survival problem. The deeper Ramon Wagdani studied the crisis, the clearer one reality became. Benin could not afford permanent confrontation with AES, and the reason was geography. Benin is a relatively small coastal country, but it controls one of the most important economic lifelines in West Africa, the port of Cotonou. For years, that port served as a critical gateway for Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. These countries are landlocked. They depend heavily on foreign ports to import fuel, food, construction materials, machinery, medicine, and consumer goods. Much of that trade moved through Benin. Every truck crossing north represented money flowing into the Beninese economy. Then the political crisis froze regional relations. Borders tightened. Trade slowed dramatically. Truck convoys disappeared from major transport routes. And the economic consequences hit faster than many officials expected. Local businesses suffered losses. Transit revenue dropped. Border communities struggled to survive. Suddenly, the conflict with AES was no longer just diplomatic. It was becoming expensive. That is why Ramon Wagdani approached the situation differently from many traditional politicians. He was not a military figure. He was an economist, a finance minister, a man trained to look at numbers before ideology. And from his perspective, the math no longer made sense. How could Benin isolate the very neighbors connected to its largest trade corridors? How could the country protect economic growth while cutting itself off from the markets directly above its northern border? But economics was only part of the equation. Security pressures were becoming impossible to ignore. Armed extremist groups were already moving southward from the Sahel region. Every month of regional hostility weakened intelligence sharing and cross-border coordination. Wagdani understood something many leaders were afraid to say publicly. Benin did not have the luxury of endless political confrontation. It needed dialogue. Not because AES had won every argument, but because geography itself was forcing West Africa back to the negotiating table. But there is another reason this moment in Benin matters so much, and that reason has a name: Captain Ibrahim Traore. At first, many international observers dismissed him as just another young military leader in the Sahel. They were wrong. Because Ibrahim Traore has become something far more powerful than a president, he has become a symbol. Across West Africa, especially among younger generations, Traore represents a new political mood that is spreading faster than many governments expected. A mood built around one idea: African sovereignty must come first. That message resonates deeply across the continent because millions of Africans feel frustrated after decades of insecurity, poverty, corruption, and dependence on foreign powers that promised stability but failed to deliver lasting progress. And Traore understands this frustration perfectly. His speeches are direct, simple, emotional. He speaks less like a traditional politician and more like someone channeling the anger and hopes of an entire generation. That is why his popularity extends far beyond Burkina Faso. In Ghana, crowds have cheered his name. In Nigeria, Pan-African youth groups discuss him constantly online. In Benin itself, many people reacted to the AES delegation almost the same way football fans react to legendary players entering a stadium. That emotional response matters politically because once public opinion begins shifting, governments eventually feel pressure to adapt. And this is exactly what may be happening in West Africa today. What makes Traore especially influential is that many Africans do not necessarily see him as a military ruler first. They see him as someone willing to stand up to systems they believe have kept Africa dependent for too long. Whether people agree with every AES policy or not, the symbolism is becoming impossible to ignore. AES now represents dignity to many supporters. Self-respect, resistance, the belief that Africans should control African decisions, and Benin's sudden diplomatic opening suggests that even governments outside AES are beginning to recognize how powerful that movement has become. Ibrahim Traore did not need to pressure Benin directly. His influence was already moving through the streets long before the politicians adjusted. The rise of AES has not only transformed West African politics, it has also created growing anxiety in Western capitals. For years, countries like France and the United States viewed the Sahel as a critical strategic zone. Military cooperation, intelligence operations, economic partnerships, and anti-terrorism missions all became part of a long Western presence across the region. Then everything began changing rapidly. French troops were pushed out of Mali. Burkina Faso moved toward a more independent security policy. Niger followed after the 2023 coup, and instead of collapsing under sanctions and diplomatic pressure, AES became more united. That development worried many Western analysts for several reasons. First, AES challenged the traditional model of regional influence. Second, it weakened ECOWAS authority. And third, it inspired political movements across Africa that increasingly questioned long-standing foreign influence on the continent. Critics of AES argue that military governments create serious risks. They warn about democratic backsliding, concentration of power, restrictions on opposition voices, and the danger of replacing one form of instability with another. Those concerns are real, and they should not be ignored. But supporters of AES respond with a different question. If the old system worked so well, why did insecurity continue spreading for decades? Why were millions of Africans still struggling with poverty despite enormous natural resources? Why did terrorism continue expanding even with foreign military assistance across the region? That frustration is exactly why AES gained emotional support far beyond the Sahel. Many Africans began feeling that sovereignty itself mattered more than promises that never produced visible change. This is the key misunderstanding many outsiders still fail to grasp. Western governments often analyze AES through the language of constitutional order. But many ordinary Africans analyze AES through the language of dignity. And once dignity enters politics, emotions become far more powerful than diplomatic pressure. Ramon Wagdani understood something many leaders in West Africa were still refusing to admit. The region could not survive permanent division. That is why, even before becoming president, he quietly started changing Benin's diplomatic language toward AES. Not with dramatic speeches, not with public declarations, but with signals. Careful signals. Instead of calling AES governments threats, he began referring to them as brotherly nations. Instead of demanding isolation, he emphasized dialogue. And slowly, something started changing behind the scenes. At first, AES leaders remained cautious. They still remembered years of hostility between Benin and Niger. They still viewed Benin as closely aligned with ECOWAS and Western security interests. But Wagdani kept reaching out. Patiently, consistently. He understood that trust in West Africa is rarely rebuilt through press conferences. It is rebuilt through repeated gestures. That is what made the inauguration ceremony so historic. When Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso finally agreed to send high-level delegations to Cotonou, they were sending a message to the entire region. The message was simple. Dialogue was possible again, and Wagdani's strategy was different from what many expected. He did not abandon ECOWAS. He did not suddenly join AES. Instead, he introduced something new into West African politics. A bridge state approach. Benin would remain connected to ECOWAS, maintain international partnerships, and preserve diplomatic balance. But at the same time, it would reopen communication with its Sahel neighbors instead of treating them as permanent enemies. That approach may sound moderate, but in the current political climate, it is revolutionary. Because Wagdani is effectively acknowledging a reality, many governments still avoid saying openly, AES is not disappearing. The Sahel cannot simply be isolated back into submission, and the future stability of West Africa will probably depend less on confrontation and more on finding ways to coexist with the new political forces reshaping the region. What happened in Benin may eventually be remembered as one of the most important political signals in modern West African history. Not because treaties were signed, not because ECOWAS collapsed overnight, but because, for the first time since the rise of AES, a major coastal state publicly acknowledged a reality that many governments were still trying to avoid. AES is now part of the future of West Africa, and that changes everything. For years, regional politics operated on the assumption that Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger could eventually be pressured back into the old system. But the opposite may now be happening. Instead of AES returning to the previous order, the region itself is slowly adapting to AES. Benin's diplomatic shift could become the beginning of a larger transformation. Other countries are watching carefully. Ghana, Togo, Nigeria. Even governments that remain officially loyal to ECOWAS understand that permanent confrontation cannot continue forever, while insecurity spreads across borders and economies remain deeply interconnected. And behind all of this stands a powerful emotional force reshaping African politics. Pan-Africanism, not the old symbolic version discussed only at conferences. A newer and more emotional version rooted in sovereignty, dignity, self-respect, and the belief that Africans should control African futures. That is why figures like Captain Ibrahim Traore resonate so strongly across the continent. Oh, to supporters, he represents an Africa that refuses to kneel politically, economically, or psychologically. Whether people agree with every decision made by AES or not, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The political imagination of Africa is changing, and once people begin imagining a different future, old systems rarely survive unchanged. Benin may have opened the first bridge between ECOWAS and AES, but the larger story is about a continent searching for a new balance between stability, sovereignty, partnership, and independence. The future of West Africa will not be built by isolation alone. It will be built by whoever understands how to balance power with dignity. IAP. This is why the conversation around Burkina Faso, AES, Pan-Africanism, the African Union, and Ibrahim Traore is becoming impossible to ignore across Africa, new political movements today. And this story is only beginning. If you enjoyed this analysis, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and stay connected because the next chapter of Africa's transformation may arrive faster than anyone expects. West Africa is shaking under the weight of terrorism, military coups, collapsing public trust, and growing anger toward the old foreign powers that once claimed they could stabilize the region. Across the Sahel, entire communities are living between fear and uncertainty, while governments struggle to stop armed groups from expanding deeper into African territory. Yet, in the middle of this dangerous crisis, something unexpected just happened. ECOWAS, the same regional bloc that once tried to isolate Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, has now sent a special envoy directly to Captain Ibrahim Traore and the Alliance of Sahel States. This meeting was not an ordinary diplomatic visit. For many Africans, it was a sign that the balance of power in West Africa is changing faster than anyone expected. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are no longer acting like isolated military governments under pressure. Instead, they are building a new security alliance, tightening borders, launching military operations, and openly challenging the old geopolitical order that dominated the region for decades. At the same time, many ECOWAS countries remain trapped in instability, political division, and worsening insecurity. That reality is forcing difficult questions across Africa. Is the AES becoming a new model for African sovereignty and self-defense? Has the old system already begun to lose control of West Africa? If you believe Africa is entering a new era of sovereignty and resistance, make sure you subscribe and stay with us until the very end. For years, ECOWAS positioned itself as the main authority in West Africa. After the military takeovers in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the organization responded with sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and threats of isolation. Many international observers expected the AES countries to collapse under economic and political pressure. But that never happened. Across the Sahel, terrorism is no longer an isolated crisis hidden in remote desert regions. It has become a growing wave of instability threatening the entire future of West Africa. Armed groups linked to JNYM, ISGS, Boko Haram, and other extremist networks continue to move across borders with deadly flexibility. Entire villages have been attacked. Thousands of families have been displaced. In many rural communities, people no longer ask whether violence will arrive. They ask when. One of the biggest fears inside the AES today is that weak border control allowed terrorist networks to spread for years without serious resistance. Vast desert routes connecting Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Libya, and northern Nigeria became corridors for weapons trafficking, fuel smuggling, and militant movement. According to many security analysts in the region, open borders without strong security coordination created dangerous vulnerabilities that armed groups exploited repeatedly. This is why Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have dramatically changed their approach. Instead of waiting for international missions or foreign coalitions to secure their territory, the AES governments are increasing military patrols, tightening border checks, expanding intelligence cooperation, and launching more aggressive counterterrorism operations. At the same time, the crisis is spreading beyond the Sahel itself. Countries like Benin and Togo are now facing increasing security threats near their northern borders. Coastal West Africa is beginning to realize that the instability consuming the Sahel could eventually move southward if the region remains divided and weak. For ordinary African families, these geopolitical debates are deeply personal. Parents want children who can safely attend school. Farmers want to work without fear of armed attacks. Traders want roads free from kidnappings and ambushes. In the eyes of many citizens, survival matters more than political slogans. For decades, many Africans were told that Western military partnerships and foreign intervention would eventually bring peace to the Sahel. Foreign bases expanded across the region. International counterterrorism missions operated for years. Billions of dollars were spent in the name of stabilization. Yet, despite all those promises, insecurity continued to spread across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. This growing frustration created a deep crisis of confidence among ordinary citizens. Across many African communities, people started asking difficult questions. If foreign military operations were successful, why were terrorist groups becoming stronger? Why were villages still falling under attack? Why were young Africans still dying while foreign powers claimed to be protecting the region? That frustration opened the door for the rise of the AES. Unlike the older political structures tied closely to foreign influence, the Alliance of Sahel States presented itself as something different. It promoted the idea that Africans must defend Africa with their own strength, their own military cooperation, and their own political decisions. For many citizens, that message carried enormous emotional power. The return of Pan-African sentiment has become impossible to ignore. Across social media platforms, radio discussions, and political debates, growing numbers of Africans are expressing support for leaders who openly challenge foreign pressure and demand greater sovereignty. To many supporters, the AES is no longer viewed simply as a military alliance. It is becoming a symbol of resistance, dignity, and self-determination. This does not mean every African fully supports the policies of the AES governments, but many people clearly believe that the old system failed to provide security, stability, or respect for African sovereignty. That belief alone is already reshaping political conversations across West Africa. Among the leaders emerging from the political transformation of the Sahel, Captain Ibrahim Traore has become the most recognized figure across West Africa. To his supporters, he represents a new generation of African leadership that refuses to accept foreign pressure, insecurity, and dependency as permanent realities. To his critics, he represents the growing influence of military rule in regional politics. But regardless of opinion, Ibrahim Traore has already changed the political conversation inside Africa. Unlike many traditional politicians, Traore built his image around military discipline, sovereignty, and direct involvement in the security crisis affecting ordinary citizens. He often appears in military uniform alongside soldiers rather than inside luxurious political settings. That image resonates strongly with many Africans who believe older political elites failed to protect the population from terrorism, corruption, and instability. For supporters of the AES, Traore symbolizes resistance against dependency. His speeches regularly emphasize that Africa must defend its own territory, protect its own resources, and build military strength without relying entirely on foreign powers. Across social media platforms, his popularity has spread far beyond Burkina Faso. Many young Africans now see him as part of a broader Pan-African movement focused on dignity, sovereignty, and self-respect. At the same time, Western governments and international organizations remain concerned about the direction of the AES. Critics argue that military governments could weaken democratic institutions and normalize coups as political solutions. Some analysts also warn that military success alone cannot solve the economic and social problems damaging the Sahel. However, many citizens inside Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger respond with a different argument. They believe security must come first before political reforms can truly succeed. In their eyes, any government that cannot protect roads, villages, and families eventually loses legitimacy. That is why the recent meeting between ECOWAS and Ibrahim Traore carried enormous symbolic importance. Not long ago, the AES leadership was treated as isolated. Today, ECOWAS itself is seeking dialogue, showing that the balance of power in West Africa may already be shifting. As the influence of the AES continues to grow, West Africa is also entering a new geopolitical competition involving outside powers searching for influence across the continent. Russia and Turkey have become two of the most important new partners for Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Unlike the older Western model of intervention, these relationships are often presented as more flexible and based on mutual strategic interests rather than political conditions. Russia has expanded military cooperation with several Sahel governments through training, equipment support, and security partnerships. At the same time, Turkey has increased its presence through defense technology, military cooperation, and economic partnerships. For the AES leadership, these new alliances represent an opportunity to diversify partnerships and reduce dependence on traditional Western powers. However, this shift also raises serious questions. Some critics warn that replacing one foreign dependency with another cannot create true sovereignty. Others argue that African countries must avoid becoming battlegrounds for global power competition between East and West. At the same time, Western governments remain deeply concerned about the rise of the AES. Many fear that the growing popularity of military-led governments could weaken democratic institutions across Africa and inspire similar political movements elsewhere in the region. There are also concerns that continued instability may damage investment, economic growth, and humanitarian conditions. Still, many Africans respond with a different perspective. They argue that promises of democracy mean little when insecurity continues to destroy communities year after year. For them, the real struggle is not simply about elections or alliances. It is about restoring hope, security, and dignity to ordinary people. The future of West Africa may now depend on whether ECOWAS and the AES can find a way to cooperate despite their deep political differences. Terrorist groups do not respect borders, political systems, or regional organizations. As insecurity spreads across the Sahel and toward coastal nations, the pressure for coordination is becoming impossible to ignore. For many analysts, the recent dialogue between ECOWAS and the AES signals the beginning of a new political reality. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are no longer viewed only as isolated military governments under sanctions. They are increasingly being seen as a regional bloc with growing influence, military coordination, and ideological impact across Africa. At the same time, the challenges facing the AES remain enormous. Military operations alone cannot solve poverty, unemployment, weak infrastructure, or the humanitarian crisis affecting millions of people across the Sahel. Long-term stability will require not only security victories, but also economic development, education, and trust between governments and citizens. Still, one lesson has become impossible to ignore. Many Africans now believe that the continent must strengthen its own ability to defend its people, secure its borders, and shape its own political future without permanent dependence on outside powers. West Africa is entering one of the most dangerous and transformative moments in its modern history. The region now stands between two possible futures. One path leads deeper into division, terrorism, foreign manipulation, and endless instability. The other path could lead toward a stronger and more self-reliant Africa, capable of defending its own people and controlling its own destiny. The unexpected meeting between ECOWAS and the AES revealed something very important. The political map of West Africa is changing, whether the old powers accept it or not. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have already become major actors shaping the future of the Sahel. Their alliance has forced difficult conversations about sovereignty, security, and the true meaning of African independence in the modern world. At the center of this transformation stands Captain Ibrahim Traore, whose rise has inspired both admiration and controversy across the continent. To many supporters of Pan-African ideals, Ibrahim Traore represents a new generation determined to protect African dignity against insecurity and foreign pressure. Others remain cautious, warning that military power alone cannot guarantee long-term prosperity or democratic stability. But one reality is clear. Millions of Africans are searching for new leadership models because too many old systems failed to deliver peace and security. The growing influence of the AES reflects not only military cooperation, but also a deeper emotional shift happening across Africa's new political consciousness. As the African Union, ACOWAS, and the Alliance of Sahel States navigate this uncertain future, the entire continent is watching closely. The struggle unfolding in Burkina Faso and across the Sahel is no longer only about territory or politics. It is about identity, sovereignty, and the future direction of Pan-Africanism itself. If you believe Africa deserves security, dignity, and sovereignty, subscribe to the channel and join us for more stories shaping the future of the continent. What happens when one of West Africa's most respected economic strategists shakes hands with one of the continent's most influential voices for sovereignty and security? Could this meeting become the beginning of a new chapter for the entire region? That question is now being asked across West Africa following the highly anticipated visit of President Romuald Wadani of Benin to Burkina Faso, where he was personally welcomed by Captain Ibrahim Traore. While many diplomatic visits come and go without leaving a lasting impact, this one appears different. At a time when terrorism continues to threaten communities across the Sahel and neighboring coastal states, the meeting between these two leaders has sparked discussions about a possible new era of cooperation. For many observers, this was not simply a ceremonial exchange between two heads of state. It was a meeting between two leaders who represent different strengths but face the same regional challenges. One is widely known for his economic expertise and development vision. The other has become a symbol of determination in the fight against insecurity and extremism. Together, they discussed security, trade, regional stability, and economic development. The timing of this visit is particularly important. Across West Africa, governments are searching for practical solutions to growing security threats, while also trying to create opportunities for economic growth. Many people now believe that stronger cooperation between Benin and Burkina Faso could help address both objectives at the same time. In this report, we will examine why this meeting matters, why it is attracting attention across the region, and whether the partnership between Romuald Wadani and Ibrahim Traore could influence the future direction of West Africa. If you enjoy following the events shaping Africa's future, be sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for more analysis. To understand why this visit generated so much interest, we must first understand the role of Romuald Wadagni. Before becoming president of Benin, he earned a reputation as one of the country's leading economic reformers. His career was built around financial management, investment planning, and policies designed to strengthen Benin's economy. This background helps explain his approach to leadership, rather than viewing security and economic growth as separate issues. Wadagni sees them as closely connected. Economic development requires stability. Investors need safe environments. Trade depends on secure transportation routes. Communities cannot prosper when insecurity threatens daily life. For that reason, his outreach to neighboring countries shortly after taking office was not accidental. It reflected a strategic understanding that Benin's future is linked to the stability of the wider region. His decision to engage directly with leaders in the Sahel signals a willingness to pursue cooperation where common interests exist. That is why his arrival in Ouagadougou was more than a diplomatic visit. It was a message that Benin may be preparing to play a larger role in shaping the future of West Africa. Captain Ibrahim Traore has become one of the most closely watched leaders in Africa, and understanding his role helps explain why the visit from President Romuald Wadagni attracted so much attention. Over the past few years, Burkina Faso has found itself on the front line of the struggle against extremist violence in the Sahel. Faced with growing security threats, Traore emerged as a leader determined to place national security and sovereignty at the center of government policy. His message has been consistent. No nation can defeat terrorism alone, and no country can build lasting prosperity while communities live under constant threat. This position has earned him support among many Africans who believe the continent must take greater responsibility for solving its own challenges. Whether people agree with all of his policies or not, few can deny that he has become an influential voice in discussions about the future of the Sahels. For Benin, Traore's experience carries particular importance. In recent years, extremist groups operating in the wider Sahel have expanded their activities toward coastal countries. Northern Benin has increasingly faced security concerns linked to instability beyond its borders. This means that cooperation with countries already confronting these threats is becoming more valuable than ever. The significance of Traore personally welcoming Wadagni should not be overlooked. Such gestures often send powerful diplomatic messages. In this case, the welcome suggested a willingness to strengthen dialogue, expand cooperation, and search for common solutions despite political differences that may have existed in the past. More importantly, the meeting highlighted a growing realization across West Africa. Security and development are no longer separate conversations. A secure region creates opportunities for trade, investment, infrastructure projects, and job creation. An unstable region threatens them all. By bringing together Benin's economic vision and Burkina Faso's security experience, Wadagni and Traore may be laying the groundwork for a partnership built on practical interests rather than political labels. The handshake between Romuald Wadagni and Ibrahim Traore carries significance far beyond the images seen at the presidential palace in Ouagadougou. For many analysts, it represents a possible shift in the political landscape of West Africa, where security realities are increasingly encouraging countries to cooperate despite past disagreements. For several years, relations between the Alliance of Sahel States and some neighboring countries followed different political paths. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger focused on building new regional structures through the Alliance of Sahel States. while other countries maintained different diplomatic priorities. As a result, many observers spoke about growing divisions across the region. However, the rise of terrorist threats has begun to change the conversation. Extremist groups do not recognize political boundaries. They move across borders, exploit weak security zones, and threaten communities regardless of national affiliations. This shared danger is creating powerful incentives for governments to work together. In that context, the meeting between Wadagni and Traore sends a clear message. It suggests that practical cooperation may be becoming more important than political differences. Security challenges require coordination, intelligence sharing, border management, and constant communication among neighboring countries. The visit also raises an important possibility. Benin could emerge as a bridge between coastal states and the Alliance of Sahel States. Such a role would allow Benin to support regional dialogue while protecting its own national interests. Given its geographic position and economic importance, Benin is uniquely placed to encourage cooperation between different parts of West Africa. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of this meeting is its symbolism. For years, headlines often focused on disagreement and division. This visit offered a different image. It showed two leaders discussing common challenges and exploring common solutions. Whether the partnership ultimately transforms the region remains to be seen. But the message was unmistakable. Dialogue remains possible, cooperation remains valuable, and shared interests may prove stronger than political differences. That is why many people across West Africa are paying close attention. The handshake between Wadagni and Traore may ultimately be remembered not simply as a diplomatic gesture, but as the beginning of a new conversation about the future of regional unity and security. While diplomatic meetings often focus on ceremonies and official statements, the reality facing West Africa today is far more urgent. Across large parts of the Sahel, terrorist organizations continue to expand their operations, creating one of the most serious security challenges the region has faced in decades. Groups linked to violent extremism have learned how to exploit vast border areas, limited infrastructure, and weak state presence in remote communities. Their operations are no longer confined to a single country. Instead, they move across borders, taking advantage of gaps in regional coordination. This is why security experts increasingly describe terrorism in West Africa as a regional problem that requires regional solutions. For Benin, the threat has become impossible to ignore. In recent years, northern areas of the country have experienced growing pressure from extremist networks operating near the borders with Burkina Faso and Niger. What was once viewed as a challenge concentrated in the Sahel is now affecting coastal states as well. Communities that previously felt distant from the conflict are becoming more exposed to instability. This reality helps explain why cooperation between Burkina Faso, Niger, and Benin is receiving so much attention. All three countries face a common threat, even if they experience it in different ways. Information sharing, border coordination, joint planning, and stronger communication can significantly improve their ability to respond. The meeting between Wadagni and Traore reflects this growing understanding. Neither country can fully secure its future without support from its neighbors. Terrorist groups operate across borders, so efforts to stop them must do the same. Perhaps most importantly, the fight against terrorism is about more than military operations. It is about protecting families, preserving trade routes, supporting local economies, and creating conditions where young people can see opportunities instead of conflict. Security has become the foundation upon which every other development goal depends. As a result, the growing partnership between Benin and Burkina Faso may represent more than diplomacy. It may be part of a broader effort to create a safer and more stable future for the entire region. Beyond security cooperation. Another important reason this visit matters is economics. In fact, many analysts believe that economic interests may become one of the strongest foundations of the growing relationship between Benin and Burkina Faso. One of the most strategic assets in this discussion is the port of Cotonou. Located on the Atlantic coast, it serves as a critical gateway for trade entering and leaving several countries in the region. For a landlocked nation such as Burkina Faso, reliable access to international markets is essential for economic growth, industrial development, and the movement of vital goods. Every year, large volumes of food products, fuel, construction materials, machinery, and consumer goods pass through transportation corridors connected to Benin. When these routes operate efficiently, businesses benefit, prices remain more stable, and economic activity expands. When insecurity disrupts transportation networks, the consequences are felt throughout the region. This is where security and economics become closely connected. A safer corridor means more trade. More trade creates jobs, attracts investment, and generates government revenue that can be used for development projects. For both Benin and Burkina Faso, protecting strategic transport routes is not simply a security objective. It is an economic necessity. The discussions between Wadagni and Traore reflected this reality. Both leaders understand that long-term prosperity depends on cooperation. Burkina Faso needs reliable access to coastal trade routes, while Benin benefits from stronger commercial links with the Sahel. Their interests are different in some respects, but they are also highly complementary. For ordinary citizens, the benefits could be significant. Stronger economic cooperation can support local businesses, improve regional commerce, encourage infrastructure development, and create opportunities for future generations. This is one reason why many observers see the partnership as more than a diplomatic initiative. It represents an effort to connect security, trade, and development into a single regional vision. As the relationship between Benin and Burkina Faso grows closer, not everyone is viewing these developments in the same way. Some Western analysts and international observers have expressed concerns about the changing political landscape in West Africa, particularly regarding the rise of the Alliance of Sahel States and the emergence of new regional partnerships. One common criticism is that the creation of alternative regional structures could weaken existing frameworks for cooperation. Others argue that stronger emphasis on sovereignty may reduce engagement with traditional international partners. Some analysts also question whether governments facing security threats can balance defense spending with long-term economic development. These concerns deserve consideration, but they also require context. The reality facing many countries in the Sahel is that security threats have reached levels that directly affect daily life, economic activity, and national stability. Without security, development projects become difficult to sustain. Schools close, businesses struggle, investment declines, and communities face increasing uncertainty. From this perspective, prioritizing security is not necessarily a rejection of development. Instead, many leaders see it as a prerequisite for development. A country cannot fully benefit from trade, education, healthcare, or infrastructure programs if large portions of its territory remain vulnerable to violence. Another important point is that sovereignty does not automatically mean isolation. Countries can seek greater control over their national decisions while continuing to cooperate with regional and international partners. In fact, the meeting between Wadagni and Traore demonstrates exactly that principle. Rather than withdrawing from engagement, both leaders are expanding dialogue and building new partnerships based on shared interests. Ultimately, the most important measure of success will not be political rhetoric. It will be results. Are communities becoming safer? Is trade increasing? Are jobs being created? Are living conditions improving? These are the questions that will determine whether this new approach delivers lasting benefits for the people of West Africa. The visit of President Romuald Wadagni to Burkina Faso may eventually be remembered as more than a diplomatic event. It brought together two leaders whose priorities reflect the most important challenges facing West Africa today. On one side stands a leader focused on economic growth, investment, and development. On the other stands a leader known for emphasizing security, sovereignty, and regional resilience. Their meeting demonstrated that these goals are not competing priorities. They are deeply connected. Throughout this report, we have seen how terrorism continues to threaten communities across the region, how economic corridors remain vital for prosperity, and how cooperation between neighboring countries has become increasingly necessary. The discussions between Wadagni and Traore highlighted a growing recognition that no nation can fully succeed in isolation. Security, trade, and development now depend on stronger regional partnerships. The broader lesson extends beyond Benin and Burkina Faso. Many African nations face similar challenges. The ability to cooperate while protecting national interests may become one of the defining factors shaping the continent's future. Dialogue, coordination, and practical solutions often achieve more than division and confrontation. Whether this meeting ultimately becomes a historic turning point will depend on the actions that follow. Agreements must lead to results. Partnerships must produce tangible benefits for ordinary citizens. Success will be measured by safer communities, stronger economies, and greater opportunities for future generations. For supporters of Pan-African cooperation, this moment offers an encouraging example of what can happen when leaders choose common interests over political differences. As Burkina Faso and Benin strengthen ties, many observers will be watching closely to see whether this spirit of collaboration influences the wider region. The vision often associated with Captain Ibrahim Traore, the aspirations of Pan-Africanism, the role of the African Union, and the emergence of an Africa new built on cooperation rather than division all connect to this larger story. Time will tell how far this partnership goes, but the handshake between Romuald Wadagni and Ibrahim Traore has already sparked an important conversation about the future of West Africa. If you believe stronger cooperation can help create a more stable and prosperous future for Africa, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and join us for our next report. A devastating JNIM assault on two military bases in northern Benin has sent shockwaves across West Africa and reignited a debate that many leaders had hoped to avoid. Despite years of international security cooperation, military training programs, intelligence partnerships, and foreign assistance, heavily armed militants were still able to launch a coordinated attack that inflicted significant damage and raised serious questions about the effectiveness of existing security strategies. For many observers, this was not simply another terrorist incident, it was a warning signal. It was a reminder that the security crisis that once seemed concentrated in the Sahel is steadily moving southward, threatening countries that previously believed they were protected by geography, diplomacy, or international partnerships. Today, we examine why this attack has become much more than a military event. We will explore how the rise of the Alliance of Sahel States, known as AES, has reshaped regional thinking about security, why the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore continues to attract attention across Africa, and whether Benin may eventually need closer cooperation with its northern neighbors to confront a growing threat. If you value in-depth African geopolitical analysis grounded in facts, history, and real developments on the ground, make sure you subscribe and join our growing community. The attack itself immediately captured regional attention because of its scale and organization. Reports indicated that hundreds of militants associated with JNIM participated in operations targeting military positions in northern Benin. The attackers reportedly conducted surveillance, coordinated their movements, and launched a highly organized assault that overwhelmed local defenses. The significance of the attack extends beyond the immediate casualties and material losses. For years, security analysts warned that extremist groups operating in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger would eventually seek to expand toward coastal West African nations. What many feared is now becoming reality. Benin has increasingly found itself on the front line of a conflict that was once viewed as a distant problem. The country's northern regions share strategic connections with areas that have experienced prolonged instability, making them vulnerable to infiltration and cross-border attacks. Perhaps the most important consequence of this incident is the conversation it has sparked. Across West Africa, policymakers, military officers, and ordinary citizens are asking difficult questions. If heavily supported security systems can still be breached, what adjustments are necessary? If terrorism continues to spread despite years of international involvement, should countries begin exploring alternative approaches? These questions have placed the experiences of Burkina Faso, Mali, and the broader AES Alliance under renewed scrutiny. Whether one agrees with their policies or not, their efforts have become impossible to ignore, and the attack on Benin has only intensified that discussion. The expansion of terrorism across West Africa did not happen overnight. It is the result of years of shifting battlefields, evolving militant strategies, and changing regional dynamics. What is happening in Benin today mirrors a pattern that security experts have been warning about for a long time. For years, JNIM concentrated much of its activity in Mali, Burkina Faso, and parts of Niger. These areas became the center of the regional counterterrorism struggle. However, as military pressure increased in certain zones, extremist groups began looking for new opportunities beyond their traditional strongholds. This is one reason many analysts believe terrorism is gradually moving south. Militants understand that borders in West Africa are often difficult to secure. They exploit remote terrain, isolated communities, and gaps in regional coordination. As a result, countries that were once considered relatively insulated from the worst violence are now facing growing risks. Benin has become one of the clearest examples of this shift. Its northern territories sit near regions that have experienced years of instability. What once seemed like a distant security challenge has increasingly become a domestic concern. The recent attack demonstrated that the threat is no longer approaching. It has already arrived. The implications extend beyond Benin. Neighboring countries such as Togo and Ghana are also paying close attention to these developments. If extremist groups continue expanding toward coastal West Africa, the entire security landscape of the region could change dramatically. This reality has strengthened calls for deeper regional cooperation. Terrorist organizations do not respect national borders. They move where opportunities exist. Therefore, many observers argue that security responses must become just as flexible and coordinated. The attack on Benin serves as a powerful reminder that no country can afford to view itself in isolation. The future stability of West Africa may depend on how effectively nations work together against a threat that increasingly affects them all. The creation of the Alliance of Sahel States marked one of the most significant geopolitical developments in modern West African history. Formed by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the alliance emerged during a period when all three countries faced severe security threats and growing frustration with existing regional arrangements. At its core, the AES was designed around a simple idea. An attack against one member should be viewed as a challenge to all members. Rather than addressing terrorism as separate national problems, the alliance seeks to approach security as a shared regional responsibility. This philosophy represents an important departure from older models. For many years, security cooperation often depended heavily on external partnerships, international missions, and outside support. While those efforts achieved some successes, many communities across the Sahel continued to experience violence, displacement, and instability. The AES leadership argues that countries facing the same threat should coordinate more directly with one another. This includes improving intelligence sharing, increasing military communication, and strengthening the ability to respond rapidly to cross-border movements by armed groups. One of the most important aspects of the AES model is its emphasis on regional ownership. Leaders within the alliance frequently stress that security decisions should be guided primarily by local realities rather than distant priorities. Supporters believe this approach allows governments to react more quickly and design strategies that better reflect conditions on the ground. The recent attack in Benin has renewed interest in this model. As extremist groups continue to operate across national borders, many observers are asking whether stronger cooperation between countries facing similar threats could improve overall security outcomes. The AES does not claim to have solved every challenge confronting the Sahel. Terrorism remains a serious concern throughout the region. However, the alliance has introduced a framework that many Africans view as an attempt to build security capacity from within, rather than relying exclusively on external actors. That idea continues to attract attention as countries search for effective ways to protect their people and defend their sovereignty. To understand why Ibrahim Traore has become one of the most discussed leaders in Africa, it is necessary to look beyond military operations and focus on the broader philosophy that guides his leadership. For Traore, security is not simply about defeating armed groups. It is about rebuilding a nation in a way that reduces the conditions that allow instability to grow in the first place. Since coming to power, he has repeatedly emphasized that military victories alone cannot guarantee long-term peace. A country must also strengthen its economy, expand opportunities for its citizens, and reduce dependence on external actors. This perspective has become a central theme in Burkina Faso's national conversation and a major reason why his influence extends far beyond his country's borders. Supporters argue that Traore represents a new generation of African leadership focused on sovereignty, self-reliance, and national dignity. His speeches often connect security, economic development, and political independence as parts of the same challenge. According to this view, a nation that cannot feed itself, develop its industries, or control its resources will always face vulnerabilities regardless of how strong its military may become. This philosophy has resonated with many people across West Africa. In countries such as Benin, Togo, Ghana, and Senegal, growing numbers of citizens follow developments in Burkina Faso with interest. Some see Traore as a symbol of African self-determination. Others remain cautious but acknowledge that his message has sparked important discussions about the future direction of the continent. The recent attack in Benin has added new relevance to these debates. As governments search for effective responses to expanding security threats, many observers are examining not only military strategies but also the broader ideas that shape them. In that context, Traore's emphasis on linking security with development continues to attract attention. Whether one agrees with all of his policies or not, his impact on regional political discourse is undeniable, and he has helped shift the conversation from dependence toward self-reliance and from reaction toward long-term national resilience. That influence may continue to grow as West Africa confronts increasingly complex security challenges. While the recent attack in Benin has drawn international attention, many observers have also focused on developments inside Burkina Faso and Mali. These two countries remain at the center of the regional struggle against extremist groups, and their experiences provide important context for understanding the broader security debate. In Burkina Faso, the government has pursued a strategy that combines military operations with efforts to strengthen national self-reliance. Security remains a major challenge, and no serious observer would claim that all problems have been solved. However, supporters of the current approach point to several developments that they believe demonstrate progress. Military authorities have expanded local defense initiatives, increased recruitment efforts, and sought to improve coordination between national forces and communities. At the same time, the government has promoted programs designed to increase domestic production, strengthen agriculture, and encourage greater economic independence. The underlying idea is that security and development must advance together. Mali presents a similar picture of determination mixed with ongoing challenges. The Malian armed forces, commonly known as FAMA, continue to play a central role in operations against JNM and other armed groups. Military pressure has remained intense across multiple regions, particularly in areas that have long served as centers of insurgent activity. Supporters of the AES approach argue that sustained military pressure has made it more difficult for extremist groups to operate freely in some locations. Critics counter that significant threats remain and that stability has not yet been fully restored. Both observations can be true at the same time. What makes the experiences of Burkina Faso and Mali particularly relevant for Benin is not the claim of perfect success. Rather, it is the willingness of these countries to experiment with a model that links security cooperation, national sovereignty, and economic self-reliance. As Benin evaluates its own future strategy, the lessons emerging from its northern neighbors may become increasingly difficult to ignore. The rise of the Alliance of Sahel States has not been welcomed by everyone across Europe, North America, and within certain international institutions. Concerns have been raised about the direction taken by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Critics frequently point to issues involving governance, political transitions, press freedom, and human rights. Others argue that the withdrawal of AES members from ECOWAS risks creating new divisions within West Africa. These concerns are part of an important debate and should not be dismissed outright. Every government, regardless of its political system, should remain accountable to its citizens and strive to protect fundamental rights. However, supporters of the AES model present a different perspective. They argue that many of the security problems facing the Sahel developed during years when foreign military partnerships were already deeply involved in the region. From this viewpoint, it is reasonable for African nations to explore alternative strategies when previous approaches failed to deliver lasting stability. Supporters also emphasize that ordinary citizens often judge policies by practical outcomes rather than political theories alone. They ask whether communities are becoming safer, whether economic opportunities are improving, and whether governments are strengthening their ability to protect national sovereignty. The debate surrounding AES ultimately reflects a larger question facing Africa. Should security strategies continue to depend primarily on external frameworks? Or should African nations assume greater responsibility for designing solutions tailored to local realities? As events in Benin demonstrate, this discussion is no longer theoretical. It is increasingly tied to urgent questions of security, stability, and the future direction of the continent. The attack on Benin has created a moment of reflection not only for one country, but for the entire African continent. The central question is no longer whether the security threat is expanding. The evidence suggests that it is. The more important question is how nations choose to respond. Benin now stands at a strategic crossroads. It can continue relying primarily on existing security frameworks, strengthen bilateral partnerships, or deepen practical cooperation with neighboring countries that confront the same threats every day. Whatever path is chosen, the recent attack has demonstrated that security challenges can no longer be viewed through a purely national lens. The broader lesson for Africa is equally important. Long-term stability requires more than military strength alone. It requires regional cooperation, economic resilience, accountable leadership, and the ability to address the root causes of instability. These principles are increasingly shaping discussions across the continent. As Africa continues to evolve, the ideas of Pan-African cooperation, Burkina Faso, Africa New, Captain Ibrahim Traore, the African Union, Pan-Africanism, and Ibrahim Traore will remain at the center of important conversations shaping the continent's future. If you enjoyed this analysis, subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and stay with us for more in-depth coverage of the developments transforming Africa today. May 2026 has delivered another shock to West Africa. Just 31 days after a series of coordinated attacks struck military positions across Mali, two nearly simultaneous attacks hit Benin, raising new questions about the security landscape of the region. The timing has captured attention far beyond Benin's borders because these attacks came only days after the country's new president, Romuald Wadagni, began sending signals that many observers interpreted as a willingness to improve relations with neighboring Niger and engage more constructively with the countries of the Alliance of Sahel States. For many Africans, this coincidence is difficult to ignore. Why would such attacks occur at a moment when diplomatic doors appear to be opening? Is Benin simply facing the same security threats that have affected much of the Sahel and the Gulf of Guinea? Or does this event reveal a deeper struggle over the future direction of West Africa? In today's analysis, we will examine the political changes taking place in Benin, the significance of the recent attacks, the growing influence of the Alliance of Sahel States, and why these developments matter not only to Benin but also to leaders such as Ibrahim Traore and millions of Africans who hope to see greater regional cooperation and stronger sovereignty across the continent. If you enjoy in-depth discussions about African geopolitics, security, and the future of regional cooperation, consider following the channel so you do not miss our upcoming analyses. The story begins with a political transition that many believe could reshape regional relationships. Romuald Wadagni entered office with a reputation as a skilled economic manager and a close ally of former President Patrice Talon. Yet his administration immediately attracted attention because of growing expectations that Benin might seek a more pragmatic relationship with Niger after years of tension. This possibility is significant because relations between Benin and Niger have direct consequences for trade, border security, energy exports, and regional stability. As a result, every signal coming from the new administration is being closely watched not only in Cotonou, but across the entire Sahel region. The attacks themselves quickly became the center of regional discussion. According to reports from Benin, 2 military positions in the northern part of the country were targeted almost simultaneously. The incidents resulted in casualties among security forces and immediately triggered military operations aimed at tracking down those responsible. What drew even greater attention was the timing. These attacks occurred at a moment when Benin's new administration was beginning its work, and when discussions about improving relations with neighboring Niger were becoming more visible. For many observers, the coincidence was striking. The events also reminded many people of what had happened in Mali just 31 days earlier. In April 2026, several coordinated attacks targeted military and strategic locations across Mali. Although the scale of the attacks in Benin was smaller, the pattern of multiple operations occurring within a narrow time frame inevitably invited comparisons. This does not automatically mean the two situations are connected. West Africa has been facing persistent security challenges for years, and armed groups have repeatedly demonstrated their ability to operate across borders. Nevertheless, when major attacks occur in different countries within a short period, regional leaders naturally begin asking broader questions about trends, coordination, and future risks. Another concern is the gradual movement of insecurity from the heart of the Sahel toward the Gulf of Guinea. Countries such as Benin, Togo, Ghana, and Côte d'Ivoire have all increased security measures in recent years because of fears that extremist violence could spread further south. For Benin, the attacks represent more than a local security incident. They highlight the reality that no country in the region can consider itself isolated from wider developments. As instability crosses borders, governments are increasingly forced to think beyond national solutions and consider stronger forms of regional cooperation. That reality may become one of the most important lessons emerging from these events. To understand why the developments in Benin matter so much, it is necessary to look beyond its borders. Benin occupies a unique strategic position in West Africa. While it is often discussed as a coastal state in the Gulf of Guinea, it is also one of the most important gateways connecting the landlocked countries of the Sahel to international markets. No relationship illustrates this better than the one between Benin and Niger. For Niger, access to the Atlantic Ocean is essential for trade and energy exports. The Niger-Benin oil pipeline, stretching from Niger's oil fields to the port of Samakpoji, represents one of the most significant economic projects in the region. Through this corridor, Niger gains access to global markets, while Benin benefits from transit activity and regional commerce. This is why any improvement in relations between the two countries carries importance far beyond diplomacy. A stable partnership between Benin and Niger could strengthen trade routes, improve border security, encourage investment, and create new opportunities for regional integration. The implications extend even further when viewed through the lens of the Alliance of Sahel States. Niger is a founding member of AES alongside Mali and Burkina Faso. If Benin develops a more cooperative relationship with Niger, the alliance would gain indirect access to a more stable maritime connection with the Gulf of Guinea. Such a development could reshape economic calculations across West Africa. Instead of remaining geographically constrained, the Sahel states would enjoy stronger connections to international trade networks. For this reason, Benin is not simply another country facing security challenges. It occupies a strategic crossroads where economics, security, energy, and regional diplomacy all intersect. This broader context helps explain why developments inside Benin are attracting attention from governments, analysts, and citizens throughout the region. The future relationship between Benin and Niger could influence not only bilateral ties, but also the long-term evolution of cooperation across the entire Sahel. At the center of many conversations about the future of the Sahel stands Ibrahim Traore, the leader of Burkina Faso, and one of the most recognizable figures in contemporary African politics. Whether people agree with all of his policies or not, there is little doubt that his influence extends far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso. One of Traore's most consistent messages has been that security challenges in the Sahel cannot be solved by individual countries acting alone. Armed groups move across borders, exploit weak coordination, and take advantage of divisions between neighboring states. For that reason, he has repeatedly emphasized the importance of regional solidarity, intelligence sharing, and collective defense. This philosophy became one of the foundations of the Alliance of Sahel States. Together with Mali and Niger, Burkina Faso has sought to build a framework that places greater responsibility for regional security in the hands of African governments themselves. Supporters view this as an effort to strengthen sovereignty and reduce dependence on external actors. Critics argue that the approach still faces serious economic and security challenges. Yet, regardless of perspective, the alliance has become an important force in regional politics. This is where Benin enters the discussion. If relations between Benin and Niger continue to improve, new opportunities for cooperation could emerge between coastal West Africa and the Sahel. Such developments would align closely with Traore's vision of stronger regional partnerships capable of addressing shared threats. For that reason, the recent attacks in Benin resonate beyond the country's borders. They raise questions about whether regional cooperation can advance despite ongoing instability. More importantly, they test whether leaders across West Africa can translate calls for unity into practical security arrangements that benefit ordinary citizens. The answer may help determine the future direction of both Benin and the wider Sahel region. The events unfolding in Benin are also taking place against the backdrop of a much larger geopolitical competition. West Africa has become a region where multiple global powers seek influence, partnerships, economic opportunities, and strategic advantages. As a result, local security developments are often viewed through an international lens. For decades, countries such as France and the United States played major roles in security cooperation across the region. Their involvement included military partnerships, training programs, intelligence support, and counterterrorism operations. However, recent years have seen significant changes. Several Sahel governments have reduced or ended certain forms of cooperation with traditional Western partners while expanding relationships with countries such as Russia, China, and Turkey. Supporters of this shift argue that African nations should have the freedom to diversify partnerships and pursue policies that best serve their national interests. They believe sovereignty includes the right to choose security and economic partners without external pressure. On the other hand, critics warn that changing alliances alone will not automatically solve deep-rooted security challenges. They point out that armed groups remain active across large areas of the Sahel and that long-term stability requires effective governance, economic development, and strong institutions in addition to military measures. This debate is important because it highlights a crucial reality. There is currently no public evidence proving that any foreign power was directly responsible for the attacks in Benin. However, periods of instability often create opportunities for various actors to pursue strategic objectives, increase influence, or strengthen their positions within the region. As Benin navigates its future, it will likely face growing pressure from competing interests. The challenge for its leaders will be to protect national security while maintaining the flexibility to pursue partnerships that support the country's long-term development and regional stability. The coming months may prove decisive for both Benin and the wider Sahel region. The direction chosen by President Romuald Wadagni could influence not only his country's security strategy, but also the broader balance of cooperation across West Africa. One possible scenario is that Benin maintains a careful middle position. Under this approach, the government would continue working with traditional international partners while also improving dialogue with Niger and neighboring Sahel states. This option could allow Benin to benefit from multiple partnerships while avoiding major geopolitical confrontations. A second scenario involves a deeper reconciliation between Benin and Niger. If political trust continues to improve, both countries could strengthen border cooperation, expand trade, and secure critical infrastructure such as the Niger-Benin oil pipeline. Such progress would create economic benefits while reducing tensions that have affected bilateral relations in recent years. A third possibility is the gradual emergence of closer security cooperation between Benin and members of the Alliance of Sahel States. This would not necessarily mean formal membership, but it could include intelligence sharing, coordinated border operations, and joint responses to regional threats. However, there is also a less optimistic scenario. Armed groups may continue targeting vulnerable areas in an effort to exploit political transitions, weaken state authority, and disrupt regional cooperation. If insecurity expands further into the Gulf of Guinea, governments could face growing pressure to devote more resources to defense and border protection. The future remains uncertain, but one fact is becoming increasingly clear. Security, diplomacy, trade, and regional cooperation are now deeply interconnected. Decisions made in Benin will influence developments far beyond its borders, just as events across the Sahel will continue to affect Benin's own strategic choices in the years ahead. As we reflect on the attacks that shook Benin in May 2026, one conclusion stands out above all others. These events are not important simply because they occurred within the borders of a single country. They matter because they reveal the complex challenges facing an entire region that is searching for greater security, stronger cooperation, and a more independent future. The attacks came at a sensitive political moment, just as a new administration was beginning to shape its foreign policy priorities. They also occurred during a period when discussions about improved relations between Benin and Niger were gaining attention. Whether these developments are directly connected or not, they highlight the reality that security and diplomacy are now inseparable across West Africa. The lesson for African nations is clear. No country can successfully confront cross-border threats alone. Terrorist networks, criminal organizations, and regional instability do not respect national boundaries. Lasting solutions require cooperation, trust, intelligence sharing, economic development, and coordinated action among neighboring states. This is one reason why the debate surrounding the Alliance of Sahel States continues to attract attention. Supporters see in it an effort to strengthen regional self-reliance, while critics question whether it can overcome the enormous challenges that remain. Yet few would disagree that the search for new approaches has become a defining feature of today's Africa. As discussions continue about Pan-African cooperation, the future of Burkina Faso, the vision promoted by Captain Ibrahim Traore, the role of the African Union, and the broader ideals of Pan-Africanism, one question remains central. Can African nations build a security framework that truly reflects their own priorities and interests? The answer will shape the Africa new generation hopes to inherit. Thank you for joining us today. If you found this analysis valuable, please follow the channel and share your thoughts below. Do you believe Benin should move closer to AES? And what role should Ibrahim Traore play in the future of regional cooperation?